Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in headlines about the latest, greatest new study? You know, one day coffee is good for you, the next day it's bad. Well, in this explainer, we're going to give you a mental toolkit to see right past the hype and become a much, much smarter reader of all this stuff. So let's get into it. You see headlines just like this all the time, right? They're bold, they're exciting, they sound like a total game changer. But how can you be sure it's the whole story? How do you know that the program itself is what made the difference and not something else entirely? That's the big question we're going to tackle today. Here's the good news. You do not need a PhD in statistics to be a critical thinker. Nope. You just need to learn how to be a research detective. And every good detective knows that to crack a case, you have to start by asking the right questions. And really, it all boils down to just two fundamental questions that get to the absolute heart of any study you read. And here they are. These are the two secret weapons. First, is it real? This is what researchers call internal validity. It's really just asking, was the study done the right way? Did A actually cause B? And second, does it matter? This is external validity. This is all about whether the results from this one little experiment actually apply to the real world, to other people in other places. If you can remember to ask these two things. All right, let's put on our detective hats. We're opening up case file number 1. We're going to look at the threats from the inside. These are the culprits that can totally mess up a study's internal validity and make us wonder if the results are even real in the first place. Okay, our first suspect is a sneaky one called maturation. And no, it has nothing to do with how mature the researchers are. It's simply the fact that people, well, we change over time, all by ourselves. We get older, we learn things, we get better at stuff. It just happens. Think about this. Imagine a study testing some new teaching method for toddlers over 6 months. And wow, by the end, they know way more words. Was it the amazing method? Or was it just, that 6 months passed in a toddler's life, which is like an eternity for language development? That's maturation, and it's a classic imposter for a program success. Next up in the lineup, we have a threat called history. This is what happens when some big outside event just crashes your carefully controlled experiment and messes up all the results. It has nothing to do with your program, but it can change everything. So for example, say you're studying a new community policing program that's meant to build trust. Things are going great, but halfway through, bam, a huge, totally unrelated crime happens and it's all over the news. Well, suddenly everyone's feelings about the police are going to change for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with your program. The study is now contaminated. Now for a really tricky one, statistical regression. You might have heard it called regression to the mean. This happens when you pick a group to study because they have extreme scores, either really, really high or really, really low. Here's the thing. Just by pure chance, on a second test, those extreme scores are probably going to drift back closer to the average, all by themselves. Just look at this. Let's say you take the lowest performing students in a school. They average 25% on a test. You give them a special tutoring program, and on the next test, they score 40%. Amazing, right? The program works. Well, not so fast. A big part of that jump is probably just regression to the mean. Their first score was an extreme low, and their second score was just, well, less extreme. It looks like a huge improvement, but it's partly a statistical illusion. And believe me, the list of these internal threats goes on. There's instrumentation. That's when your measuring stick changes, like a grader who gets more lenient as they get tired. There's attrition. That's when people drop out of the study, but more from one group than the other, which skews the results. And of course, selection bias, when your groups were never really equal to begin with, like comparing eager volunteers to people who were forced to be there. Okay, detective, let's close that case file. Let's pretend for a second that a study was done perfectly. No internal threats, the result is totally real. Great. But now we have to open case file number 2 and ask that second huge question. So what? Does this actually matter in the real world? Our first big threat to external validity is a famous one. It's called reactivity, or you might know it as the Hawthorne effect. It's super simple. People act differently when they know someone's watching them. I mean, think about it. A study wants to measure how often police officers get out of their car to talk to people in the community. But if there's a researcher sitting in the passenger seat with a clipboard, what do you think is going to happen? Of course, the officers are going to be on their absolute best behavior. The results might look amazing on paper, but they probably don't reflect what happens on a normal Tuesday. Another huge threat is something called ecological validity. It sounds complicated, but it just means context is everything. The findings of any study are tied to the very specific people, the specific place, and the specific time it was conducted.
And if any of those things are too unique, you can't assume the results will apply anywhere else.
So let's say a fantastic community policing strategy works wonders in a small, quiet, wealthy suburb. Can we just copy and paste that same program into a dense, high-crime urban center and expect the exact same results? Probably not. The entire ecology, the whole environment, is different. The results just might not travel.
So we've looked at all these potential traps, all these ways research can be misleading. What's the final verdict here? Why does any of this matter in our day-to-day lives? Because here's the bottom line. This is not just some academic game. Understanding these threats is absolutely crucial. We use the results of these studies to make huge billion-dollar decisions about public policy, about new medicines, about how we educate our children. If we get it wrong because we relied on a flawed study, the real-world consequences can be massive.
So what's the big takeaway for you? It's this simple, two-step critical lens, your new superpower. From now on, whenever you see a new study, step 1, you ask, is this real? You look for those internal culprits. Did the kids just get older? Did something happen in the news? Was there a bias in who they picked? Then step 2, you ask, does this matter? Were people just putting on a show for the researchers? Would this even work in my town with my community? So there you have it. You now have the tools. You're ready to look past those big, bold headlines and start asking the questions that really matter. So the next time you see a study making some incredible claim, you won't just accept it. You'll know exactly where to start your investigation.